There's a particular weight that comes with holding on. You can feel it in your chest, in the way your thoughts circle back to the same person, the same moment, the same possibility that no longer exists. We carry these weights without always realizing we've picked them up, and sometimes for far longer than we need to. The human mind has this remarkable capacity to form attachments. Every interaction, every shared moment, every promise made creates tiny threads between us and the world around us. These threads connect us to people, to places, to versions of ourselves we once were. Most of the time, these connections enrich our lives. They give us continuity, identity, a sense of belonging. But sometimes, these same threads become chains. When we lose something or someone, the thread doesn't simply dissolve. The connection persists in memory, in habit, in the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we deserve. The mind doesn't distinguish well between what exists now and what existed before. To your brain, the person who left last month still occupies neural pathways carved over years. The job you lost, the dream that didn't materialize, the friendship that faded. All of these remain encoded in the architecture of your thoughts. This explains why letting go feels less like a decision and more like a battle. You're not just releasing something external. You're attempting to rewire patterns that have become part of your internal landscape. Every time you reach for your phone to text someone who's no longer in your life, every time you drive past a place that holds memories, every time you catch yourself planning for a future that won't arrive, you're bumping up against these established pathways. The psychology of attachment reveals something crucial. We don't just become attached to people or things themselves. We become attached to the feelings they gave us, the version of ourselves we were when we were with them, the future we imagined. This layering makes release complicated. You might logically understand that a relationship has ended, but emotionally, you're still attached to the safety you felt, the excitement, the validation. You're holding on to who you were becoming in that context. When you lose something meaningful, your brain experiences it similarly to physical pain. The same regions that light up when you touch a hot stove activate when you're grieving a loss. This isn't metaphorical suffering. The ache is real, measurable, biological. Understanding this offers a strange kind of permission. You're not being dramatic or weak. You're having a normal human response to disconnection. But there's another layer beneath the pain. Often, what makes letting go so difficult isn't just the loss itself, but what the loss represents. When someone leaves, we might interpret it as evidence of our unworthiness. When a dream collapses, we might see it as proof of our inadequacy. We conflate the specific loss with a much larger, more frightening narrative about our fundamental value. So we hold on, because releasing the person or the dream feels like accepting that damaging story about ourselves. The fear of letting go often masquerades as loyalty, as depth of feeling, as proof that we're good people who don't give up easily. We tell ourselves that holding on demonstrates our capacity for love, our strength of character, our refusal to be shallow or fickle. And sometimes this is true. Commitment matters. Perseverance has value. But there's a profound difference between holding on from a place of genuine hope and possibility and holding on because we're afraid of what release might say about us. The mind craves closure. We want the story to make sense, to have a clear ending, a satisfying resolution. When we don't get this, we create it ourselves. We replay conversations, reimagine outcomes, construct elaborate explanations. This mental rehearsal can feel productive. We convince ourselves we're processing, understanding, learning. But often, we're just different versions of stuck. We're holding the door open, keeping one foot in a space that no longer exists. What makes this particularly painful is that part of you knows. Some deeper awareness recognizes that you're expending energy on something that can't be recovered. But another part insists on continuing, driven by the sunk cost of emotional investment. You've already given so much: time, energy, hope, pieces of yourself. Walking away feels like declaring all of that worthless. So you stay, not because the situation is nourishing, but because leaving would mean acknowledging the depth of what you've already lost. The process of release begins not with forgetting, but with acceptance. This word gets used so frequently it's almost lost meaning, but acceptance doesn't mean approval or resignation. Acceptance means acknowledging what is actually true. The relationship has ended. The opportunity has passed. The person has changed. The dream requires a different path. Acceptance is simply letting reality be reality without layering it with stories about what it should be. This sounds simple, but activates tremendous internal resistance. The mind rebels against facts that threaten its constructed narratives. We've built entire identities around certain relationships, certain futures, certain versions of ourselves. Accepting their absence means reconstructing who we are without them. This is identity work, which is among the most demanding psychological labor we undertake. There's a particular kind of suffering that comes from arguing with reality. When you insist that things should be different than they are, you create constant internal friction. Every moment of your day becomes an opportunity for disappointment, as reality refuses to conform to your wishes. This doesn't mean you can't want things to change or work toward change, but there's a fundamental difference between wanting change and refusing to acknowledge what currently exists. People often confuse letting go with not caring. We worry that if we release our grip on something, we're admitting it didn't matter, that we didn't matter, that the whole experience was meaningless. But the opposite is closer to truth. Letting go requires acknowledging exactly how much something meant. You can't release what you haven't fully felt. The willingness to let something be in the past is often evidence of how deeply it existed in your present. Memory plays a complicated role in this process. We have selective memory, particularly for emotionally charged experiences. When you're missing someone, your mind tends to highlight the best moments, the brightest feelings, the peak experiences. The difficult times, the incompatibilities, the reasons you're better apart, these fade into soft focus. This isn't dishonesty. Your brain is trying to protect you from the pain of loss by emphasizing what was valuable, but it makes moving forward harder because you're comparing your current reality to a highlight reel rather than the full, complicated truth of what was. Grief, in all its forms, doesn't follow a linear path. The stages of grief that get referenced so often, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, were never meant to be sequential. You'll touch anger one day, fall back into denial the next, find a moment of acceptance on Tuesday, and wake up bargaining again by Friday. This isn't failure. This is how humans process loss. The non-linear nature of grief can make you feel like you're not making progress, but circles aren't the same as standing still. What shifts over time isn't necessarily the presence of feeling, but your relationship to it. In the beginning, grief is constant, overwhelming, all-consuming. It fills every available space. Gradually, with time and attention, the grief remains, but becomes something you can hold alongside other experiences. You can miss someone and also enjoy your afternoon. You can carry sadness about what didn't work out while building something new. The feelings don't cancel each other out. You just become larger than the grief. Part of what makes letting go possible is meaning-making. Humans are story-creating creatures. We need narrative coherence. When something ends badly, when loss feels senseless, when people leave without explanation, we're left with fragments that don't form a complete picture. The impulse is to keep analyzing, keep searching for the missing pieces. But sometimes, the meaning we need isn't about understanding exactly what happened. Sometimes the meaning is in recognizing what we learned, how we grew, what we discovered about our own capacity and resilience. This doesn't require gratitude for painful experiences. You don't need to be thankful someone hurt you or that something fell apart. But you can acknowledge that you survived it, that you know yourself differently because of it, that you've gained some kind of wisdom, even if it came at a cost you wouldn't have chosen to pay. Forgiveness often gets tangled up in conversations about letting go. There's pressure to forgive, as if it's a moral obligation or a necessary step in your healing. But forgiveness isn't always possible or appropriate. Some betrayals are too deep, some harms too significant. What's essential isn't necessarily forgiveness, but releasing the hope that the past could have been different. You can acknowledge someone wronged you while also choosing not to carry that weight forward. You can hold people accountable and still set down the burden of resentment. The energy you spend holding on to anger or hurt is energy diverted from your present life. This isn't about absolving anyone of responsibility. Someone can be entirely in the wrong, and you can still decide that continuing to focus on that wrong is costing you more than it's worth. You're not letting them off the hook. You're releasing yourself from the obligation to keep holding them there. As you move through this process, you'll notice something subtle shift. The person or situation you're releasing will stop being the first thing you think about when you wake up. You'll go hours, then days without that automatic checking, wondering where they are, what they're doing, whether they're thinking of you. This gradual loosening happens so incrementally that you might not notice until suddenly you realize you've gone a whole week without that particular pain. This doesn't mean you've forgotten or stopped caring. What it means is that you've metabolized the experience. It's become part of your history rather than your constant present. The memories remain, but they've lost their sharp edges. You can touch them without bleeding. The space that opens up when you finally release something is disorienting at first. You've become accustomed to the weight, the preoccupation, the mental real estate devoted to this person or situation. Without it, you might feel oddly empty, untethered. Who are you without this relationship to define you? What do you want when you're not wanting them? What occupies your thoughts when they're not the constant background noise? These questions are the doorway to something new. They're uncomfortable because they require you to discover yourself outside the context of what you've lost. But they're also an invitation. The energy you've been directing backward can now flow forward. The space in your mind and heart that's been occupied can now hold something else, something chosen, something nourishing, something aligned with who you're becoming rather than who you were. Letting go is not a single moment of release. There's no day you wake up and suddenly you're done, completely moved on, utterly free from the past. What happens is more gradual, more textured than that. You let go in layers. You release the hope that it will be different. Then later, you release the story about what it meant about you. Then even later, you release the habit of checking if they've reached out. Each layer requires its own small death, its own mourning. But with each release, you become lighter. Not because you've forgotten what mattered, but because you've stopped dragging it behind you everywhere you go. You've allowed it to become part of your foundation, rather than an anchor holding you in place. The strange paradox of letting go is that it often brings you closer to the truth of what was. When you're in the middle of holding on, everything is distorted by need and fear and hope. You can't see clearly because you're too busy trying to make something work, trying to get someone to stay, trying to resurrect what's already gone. But when you finally release your grip, when you stop fighting so hard, you can actually see what was real. The genuine love alongside the incompatibility, the beautiful moments alongside the fundamental misalignment, the value in the experience, even though it couldn't continue. This clearer sight is a gift you give yourself through the act of letting go. You trade the fantasy of what might have been for the truth of what was. And truth, even painful truth, is solid ground to build on. What you're building toward is a version of yourself that includes this experience without being defined by it. You loved someone, and they left. You tried something, and it didn't work. You hoped for something, and it didn't arrive. All of that becomes part of your story, but not the story. You contain multitudes, all your past experiences, all your present realities, all your future possibilities. Nothing you've lived through, no matter how significant, is the totality of who you are. The act of letting go is ultimately an act of trust. You're trusting that you can survive without this person, this dream, this version of the future. You're trusting that something else might be possible, even if you can't see it yet. You're trusting your own resilience, your capacity to metabolize loss and continue forward. That trust doesn't arrive fully formed. You build it slowly, through small acts of moving forward, through getting out of bed when you don't want to, through allowing yourself to laugh without guilt, through making plans that don't include the person you're releasing, through choosing, again and again, to be present in your actual life rather than the life you wish you had. Letting go asks you to believe in your own continuation, to recognize that you existed before this loss and will continue to exist after. That your worth isn't determined by whether someone stayed or left, whether something worked out or fell apart. That you're whole, even when you feel broken. That you're capable, even when you feel weak. That you're worthy of good things, even when good things have departed. This is the deepest work of release, not just letting go of the external thing, but letting go of the stories that loss activated. The story that you're not enough. The story that good things don't last. The story that you're destined to be disappointed. These narratives burrow deep, and they can persist long after you've stopped actively missing what you lost. What remains after you've done this work is a particular kind of freedom. Not freedom from caring or from feeling. You'll always care about things that mattered. You'll always feel the echo of significant losses. But you'll be free from the compulsion to keep trying to change what's already happened. Free from the exhausting work of holding doors open that have already closed. Free to turn your attention toward what's actually in front of you, the life you're actually living, the person you're actually becoming. That person, who you're becoming, has integrated this loss. They're not untouched by it, but they're not destroyed by it either. They carry it as part of their depth, their complexity, their hard-won wisdom. They know what it means to love and lose. They know what it means to hope and grieve. They know what it means to hold on and, eventually, to let go. And in that knowing, there's a strange kind of peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of accepting. The peace of no longer fighting what is. The peace of trusting yourself to handle whatever comes next. The peace of finally setting down something you were never meant to carry forever.